welcome everyone into our webinar today. Welcome to the Digital Dangers Discussing Tech-Facilitated Gender-Based Violence webinar. Today is March 4th, 2025. The webinar will be for about an hour. My name is Andrea Haefele. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a teacher in the York Region District School Board, currently on secondment as a curriculum consultant here at Ophea. Very excited for the topic of discussion today. We're going to start off with some housekeeping items. First off, if you need support, please use the private chat option in the drop-down menu to connect with my colleague Ode or Katie. We're going to also ask you to use the chat or the Q&A functions to communicate with our team of presenters. So both Julie, Katie, and myself will be here to monitor both the chat and Q&A, or the Q&A tool that can be accessed. Check out on the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. And you can also access the closed captioning if you need to. It can also be turned on under the More option along the bottom of your screen. So allow for a few seconds for people to navigate on that. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourself. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I see some familiar faces. Perfect. So we're going to get started. I really want to make sure that we create a safer and braver space for everyone by respecting others as we continue to chat, share our thoughts, or even using the Q&A function. I'm going to read the two items on our slide right now, just as these are webinar norms, and we want to make sure that everyone's in agreement and also respecting these norms. So first off, we really encourage your curiosity and an openness to hearing each other's perspectives. We've received a lot of questions as registration came in from yourself, so we will also try our best to answer those questions. And in regards to respecting each other on this platform today, in order for us to allow for productive discussion, we are committed to maintaining a space that demonstrates mutual respect. We wanted to share that there's zero tolerance when we talk about language and when we use our language and also actions on this platform. So thank you so much for that. I wanted to first off introduce joining us today, Kayla Coates. Kayla Coates is from the Chatham-Kent Sexual Assault Crisis Center. She is a support and advocacy worker offering short and long-term counseling for survivors of sexual violence, as well as the public education coordinator. So you can reach out to Kayla directly through the private chat in the Zoom function and let her know if you would like to remain there or go into a breakout room together, which Kayla can also set up for you. So thank you, Kayla, for joining us today and also providing that support on the back end. Perfect. Thank you so much. So I'm very excited to share this platform and this webinar today with Julie Lalonde and Dr. Kaitlynn Mendes. I'm going to throw the mic to Julie. I've worked with Julie for a few years now. Julie, if you can turn on your mic and share a little bit about who you are and how you enter into this space today.
Everyone, so my name is Julie S. Lalonde, pronouns are she, elle. I am originally from small town Northern Ontario, but I'm currently based in Ottawa, and I have spent the last 23 years working to end gender-based violence in Canada, primarily through bystander intervention and community care. I created the Draw the Line campaign in 2011, and I've created a number of campaigns around sexual violence and stalking prevention. And I train thousands and thousands and thousands of Canadians every year. And so that sort of best practices is what's reflected in the resources that you're going to see today. So delighted to be here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Julie. We work a lot together, so always learning whenever we get the chance to do that. Dr. Kaitlynn Mendes, I'll share the mic with you. If you can share a little bit about who you are and how you entered into this space today.
Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here. So I'm based at Western University, and I've been doing research around digital spaces for maybe about 14 or 15 years. So I actually started to study violence through studying actually digital activism and looking at how women in particular, survivors, were turning to digital spaces to challenge rape culture, violence. But even in talking to them about their experiences, it was really hard to ignore the various forms of violence that they were experiencing in digital spaces. And so it really kind of got me sparked on this topic. So I'm based in London in Ontario, and I've been studying what I'm going to introduce this new term, tech-facilitated sexual violence, for about 5 years.
Thank you so much. And I've reviewed your resources before. They are awesome. I also have a teenager at home who is heavily on tech when he can. So I'm very excited to learn about this topic too. So, Ode, if you can move on to the next slide, and I want to get us started with our land acknowledgement. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the land upon which Ophea's work takes place. Ophea's work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories all across Ontario. We are grateful for the opportunity to meet and work on these territories and recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land. We are aware that our settler acknowledgement uses language which may differ from language used by Indigenous peoples. Our land acknowledgement seeks to recognize the Indigenous territories where our work happens, and in the true spirit of truth and reconciliation, it strives to be more than just words. By learning, understanding, and acknowledging, we wish to pay respect to the rich Indigenous history of Ontario. So for myself today, I would like to acknowledge the land on which I live, work, and play on. This is the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe nations and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. When we acknowledge our land today, we also want to recognize the links between colonization and rape culture and the reality that we cannot end gender-based violence without decolonization. I really believe that it is important to hear and respect the stories of recommendations for change from Indigenous peoples who have experienced gender-based violence. Learning from these stories is essential to process truth and reconciliation. So thank you so much for allowing me to share that with you during this time. Okay. So very brief, here's our agenda for today. We're going to start off with some context setting before we enter into more of the tech-based, gender-based violence. Then we'll follow up with some expert insights. We'll share a little bit about something new that's coming here at Ophea, and then we'll get into the main part of the session today, which is our panel discussion and Q&A, and then we'll end off with the next steps and call to action. Okay? Perfect. Okay, so for some context setting, I've been doing this work with Julie Lalonde for a while and also here at Ophea. And I wanted to also anchor the conversation today on some information. When we talk about respect, privacy, and dignity and freedom from harassment, we have to think about our students and also every person in our school community, that they have the right to these things. When we specifically talk about deepfakes, what we mean is that deepfakes can be used to generate entertainment. They may also be used to create and share false, degrading, and humiliating images of an individual with the intent to cause harm. And to be honest, what I've also continued to be learning is that deepfakes can also affect all people. However, when we think about girls and women, this affects them disproportionately. And the girls and women who are almost always the target of consensual pornographic deepfake images or videos and constituting other forms of gender-based violence, we really need to understand that how this affects girls and women is really degrading. And also when we think about their physical and emotional well-being in our school communities. I want to get a feel of the room right now in terms of how you can answer this question. So question number 1 says, how aware are you of the impact of deepfakes as a form of gender-based violence, particularly affecting girls and women through non-consensual pornographic images or videos? And number 2, do you believe deepfakes pose a significant threat to individual privacy and dignity? We have about 61% of participants in the room right now who are somewhat aware, moving down to 17% very aware, and 20% not aware, and 2% not sure. Amazing. Question number 2, do you believe deepfakes pose a significant threat to individual privacy and dignity? 88%. Interesting. Okay, I'm going to close it on my end. Ode, if you can animate the slide to provide some of our stats. Perfect. Thank you so much. So on your slide right now, what you see are 3 stats. The references are also on the bottom of the slide. Over 90% of deepfakes online are non-consensual pornographic clips of women. Okay, 74% of Canadians under 30 have encountered a deepfake. and 31% of young people come across them on a weekly basis. So, hoping that these stats um, provide some context for you before we get into this topic area. I know Katie has a lot of information that she will be sharing shortly. Very excited to share this platform with Katie. What she'll be doing is going into more discussion in terms of what discussing tech facilitated gender-based violence looks, sounds, and feels like. Katie, I'll go on mute right now. It's all you. I'm very excited to listen to the information that you will be sharing with us.
Thanks so much. And thanks again for having me today. What I forgot to say in my introduction was that I am a quarter of the DIY digital safety team. So this is a project that I've been doing with some colleagues around Canada. So I've got Susie Dunn, she's a legal scholar at DAL, Alexa Dodge, she's a digital criminologist at St. Mary's University, and Chris Dietzel, he specializes in education and media, and he's at Concordia University. So we have just finished going around Canada talking to teenagers about their experiences with tech and online harms. And so the aim of our research is to take that knowledge and use it to support young people in their digital lives. I think we recognize we're beyond the point of saying we can just ban technology, ban social media. The tech is here. So basically, we're really hoping that we can find out more about young people's digital lives and teach them how to have healthy relationships with other people and their tech. We want to teach them how to behave ethically. We want them to know their rights and their responsibilities, and we want them to know what resources are available if or when things go wrong. So since last year, we've gone all across Canada. And next slide, please. We've gone across Canada talking to teenagers. So we did 25 focus groups with 147 young people, and we really tried to kind of cover geographic spread. We weren't just in the big cities like Toronto. We really kind of tried to reach rural areas as well. We were in Nova Scotia, Quebec, Ontario, Alberta, and the Yukon. We were doing this research in both French and English, and we were talking to young people about their online experiences. So I know in this presentation, I'm going to use the term tech-facilitated sexual violence, but when we spoke to teens, we weren't using that language. We would ask them to tell us about things that were happening online that were weird or strange or caused drama. And we avoided this language of like harm because we recognize that there are a lot of things that happen that are so normal for teens. So for example, being sent an intimate image that you don't want is very, very normalized, and many teens won't necessarily recognize that as something harmful. And so I think by kind of just opening up these broad conversations, teens told us a lot about their experiences, and we can broadly break them down into sexualized and non-sexualized experiences. So next slide, please. So if we think about the sexualized experiences that they had, this included things like online harassment, cyber stalking. That was enabled through platforms like Snapchat, which have geolocation turned on. That's like very much the norm for teens who are using Snapchat. Whether it was the use of spy cams to secretly record or kind of upskirting. Non-consensual sharing of intimate images was a big one, and pressure to send intimate images. Deepfake nudes, like Andrea was just talking about, and sextortion. So this is like a form of blackmail that involves nude images. And, I can talk more about some of these specific practices in more detail, but I think what's important to note about all of these is, we often think that these are things that are only impacting girls, and they're not. They impact boys, and they also impact non-binary and trans youth as well. So we have these experiences, and they're often thought of or talked about as forms of cyberbullying. And one thing that we're trying to do is encourage other people to move towards this language of tech-facilitated sexual violence. So next slide, please. So this is kind of seen as this umbrella term that refers to a range of harmful sexual behaviors that occur via digital technologies. So it could be something that happens, in real life that's recorded and shared online, or it can be something that is only created digitally and then shared digitally. So increasingly, forms of sexual violence and harassment are happening through digital technologies. And so tech is increasingly playing a role. So again, whether it's the vehicle through which this harm takes place, or it records harm or harassment that happens offline and then circulates it online. So, why this kind of like term of TFSV? Why not just cyberbullying? Well, as my colleague Susie Dunn argues, having precise language is really important for lawmakers, researchers, educators, and sexual violence support services because it can help shape norms. And it's important to have this language so that we can develop best practice and regulation that are addressing these new forms of harm. So in other words, language matters. And unfortunately, using generic terms like cyberbullying often minimizes the harms and it can create confusion on how we should respond. Like, is it something that we just say, oh, just get over it? Or is it something that we recognize people's rights have been violated, that they may need different forms of accountability and that there are certain services that can support them? So I do want to flag quickly that our research also uncovered other forms of non-sexualized harms that are worth mentioning, but it goes beyond the scope of what I have time to talk about today. So the next slide, please. So other online experiences that youth told us about included homophobic, transphobic, misogynistic, and racist comments, being outed, so members of the LGBTQ plus community. They told us a lot about authentic gore and violence videos that they were seeing. So whether it was people getting beheaded, being shot, being hit by cars, animal cruelty, boys in particular were telling us about having this content pushed on them, so they're not asking for it. Misinformation and disinformation, the impersonation of other people online, various forms of online bullying, and other forms of financial scams. So when we think about what our research found, we noted the following. Next slide, please. We definitely found that experiences are shaped by identity and personal interests. So this means that the kinds of harm that young people encounter are very much linked with their social location, their gender, their age, their race, their sexuality, their immigration status, and more. We also noted that algorithms are fueling harm. So it's really important to think about the algorithms and the platform structures and governance, because this helps shape what is happening and also possible solutions. So this suggests that it's not just about teaching young people to, don't send that intimate image on without that person's consent, because sometimes people are being pushed content that they are not looking for and they're not asking for. So it suggests that these social media companies in particular and tech companies have a real role to play. And this basically all means that there is no one size fits all approach. There are no easy solutions to these issues. And I think the focus groups gave us insight into some of these things, but we also recognize that, 150 youth isn't a lot. So we decided to take these findings from the focus group and conduct a nationwide survey of teens across Canada to give us a better sense of how prevalent some of these practices are, what they do when they happen, what they know about their rights, and what kind of supports and resources they want. So next slide, please. So we just finished conducting a survey and we haven't fully finished analyzing the data, but these are some highlights. So we had over 1,000 survey respondents, and they're all age 13 to 18. And 28%, so about 1 in 3, said they've had at least one type of harm happen to them. And we were only asking about those forms of sexualized harms that I mentioned earlier. The most common ones that they said were having someone send a sexual image, nude, or video that they didn't ask to see, being sent porn that they didn't want to see, or being sexually harassed online. We also had almost 50% had at least one types of these harm happen to someone that they know. So here, again, non-consensual sharing of intimate images was really big, but other things too, like having a sexual rumor being spread about them and experiencing sextortion. So 13% of respondents knew someone who had experienced sextortion. And we also asked youth about, have you done any of these things? Now, only 7% said that they had, although even anecdotally in our focus groups, teens were telling us about many of these things that they had done. So again, they may not want to tell us what they've done, but we think that the number is a lot higher than that. So we were interested in what they did. If you had one of these experiences, what happened next? Next slide, please. So we asked them, who did you tell? And you can see that actually 25% of them tell nobody. And that is also kind of quite worrying, because at the moment, we don't think young people are often equipped with the knowledge of what to do, where to go, what their rights are. You can see 44% are telling their parents. That was very surprising to us. We did not think as many teens would be telling their parents. And other research I did in the UK, the statistic was far lower than that. But they're also not telling social media platforms, they're not telling the police, and they're not telling schools. And we think that that is something that, with greater support for teachers, we think that schools could be a really important place to support young people experiencing these issues. So we not only asked, who did you tell, but did it help? So when you told these people, did it help? Next slide, please. So we can see here that actually telling parents was the most helpful. So when they told someone, telling their parents actually seemed to be quite helpful, but the police, schools, and platforms were decidedly unhelpful. And again, this suggests that there needs to be more support for these different institutions and how they can then go and support young people. We also asked who they think should be helping. Next slide, please. So, we can see that they definitely think social media platforms should be helping a lot more than they are. They think that the police should be helping. They think schools should be helping. So it again suggests to us that when we're thinking about the kinds of resources and supports that are needed, there's lots of different institutions that we need to be and we are going to be reaching out to. So we know more about these harms. We still have work to do finding out which supports, resources, tools, and education are helpful. But some things that we can tell you, and this is back to the focus groups, what young people told us that they want. So next slide, please. Youth were very vocal in our focus groups about wanting anonymous, non-judgmental, and confidential supports. They really stress the importance of having supports. Many young people, especially in the focus groups, were worried about having things being brought back to their parents or the police. They did not want to involve these other people. They were worried about overreach. They were worried about having their devices taken away. And so they often just want someone who they can talk to and share this information with. The other thing that they told us is that the fear-based approach, like don't ever send a nude because you'll never get a job, you'll never go to university, your life will be over if that nude gets circulated. They told us that those kinds of messaging does not help.
Thank you so much, Katie, for sharing the facts from this survey and also the findings on what technology-based facilitated sexual violence looks like today, and also spotlighting what teens are actually saying, right? And as I hear you talk, I really think that it's a collective responsibility in a school community to not just learn about what this looks, sounds, and feels like, but also be able to respond in a productive way. And as you said, you shared some things of what students want from us. Learning about this form of gender-based violence is such a key to understanding the concept of consent in this digital age. And this actually leads us to our next slide when we talk about healthy relationships and the importance of responsible citizenship when students are online. Thank you so much, Julie. I'll share the mic with you. Before I hand it over to you, though, first, I do want to share that Ophea has a new activity as part of our gender-based violence prevention education resource, and it will be launching early spring. Very excited to have Julie here today to talk a little bit about this new activity card and just to share some context of what this looks like when it will be launched. Julie, over to you.
Thanks, everyone. So I'll make this brief because I do want to create space for folks to ask some questions. So I also want to shout out DIY and their amazing work and echo what was said in the chat. I use their resources a lot. If you are an educator or you are trying to maybe challenge an educator in a young person's life who does have some pretty archaic views on this stuff, I have used more than one of the DIY infographics as a bit of a little mic drop. I'm thinking particularly recently of a teacher who pushed back, who did not actually understand the legality around sharing of nudes. And I shared, if I'm 15 and I share a nude with another 15-year-old and it doesn't go beyond our phone, we haven't broken the law. And he was like, that's not true. And I was like, yes, it is true. So here's a good resource. So I'm really grateful to be partnering with DIY for this conversation today, and really, truly want to encourage folks to go and check out their resources. And that's, I think, what we're hoping your takeaway is for today is that there are resources. If you are feeling overwhelmed by the breadth of the problem, you're like, what are we like, what? I'm not on Snapchat. I don't know what this stuff is. There are resources, there are things already out there and the biggest struggle we have is getting it into people's hands. So we are delighted to have a new resource that will be dropping very soon, as Andrea said. And it's based off of the Draw the Line campaign, which some of you might be familiar with, which I created with the Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centers in 2011, if you can believe it, long before Me Too, and has since expanded to including lots of partner organizations, including White Ribbon, Egal Human Rights Trust, Anishinaabe Aski Nation. So there's tons of resources that exist already, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But this one is specifically addressing the reality of deepfake nudes. So the question is, your friend shows you a deepfake nude he made of his ex and is threatening to share it with the guys in his class. Do you call him out? So this will be an image, as you can see here. 0 to 10, do not recommend. And then there's going to be a classroom resource. So literally like an activity sheet, making curriculum links. So if you're an educator thinking, oh, can I teach this? How do I teach this? Absolutely. We make those curriculum links for you. And there's a video resource as well, where I and some other experts kind of set the stage a little bit, talk about the context, and then you pause the video, you facilitate a discussion with them around, are you going to call them out? What are you going to do with this information? And then you go back to the video where we give you some really concrete takeaways and some really concrete ways in which folks can intervene. So to build off what Kaitlynn was talking about in the research that DIY has done, we know that young people are seeing this stuff, right? You saw the stats at the beginning. It's over 30% of youth are seeing a deepfake every single week. And 90% of the deepfakes that exist in this world are non-consensual nudes of women and girls. 90% of the deepfakes that exist on the internet are intended to be harmful. And that's important, I think, again, to build off what was said earlier. Like, I think when people think about deepfakes, they often assume it's celebrities, and we're seeing that right now in a big bad way in a political context, right? You'll see like a deep fake of Trudeau saying something that he never said, or Trump doing something. And like, I think that's where a lot of people's heads go. And so they don't necessarily make the link to, well, if that technology exists and it's in some cases free and very easy to use, of course, that's going to be a tool that's going to be used to further the violence that we've seen existing for quite some time in our culture, right? And where we're at right now with the deepfakes conversation is unfortunately where we were with the sharing of nudes without consent prior to 2015. There's no law currently around, it's not currently illegal to make a deepfake nude of someone else. So right from the jump, you can't make a legal argument. You can't take that, like, as Kaitlynn was talking about, right? That like hugs not drugs and like just don't have sex, like that kind of abstinence only approach, because oftentimes that approach, the sort of scare tactic that's used is around, you're going to go to jail for X, Y, and Z. One, we know that people are not actually being criminalized for a lot of this behavior. So that tactic is really, truly not landing in the way that we think it is. But also, it's not the reality right now. And so more than ever, it is time for us to make a real moral argument and talking about how this stuff is harmful, regardless of whether or not it's illegal. And that's what we really try to capture through the resource itself, is really understanding the moral argument. And I think for us, what's the most important thing to think about is, why are you doing this in the first place? Regardless of whether or not he actually sends the photo on to his classmates or to his friends or whomever, the fact that you sat at home and you made this resource is already a problem. And part of that we also get into with the resource that I think is really important for you to know if you are engaging in these conversations is, don't get caught in the, is it a real photo or not? And that's where the conversation tends to go right now, especially with young people, is like, well, if it's not a real photo, then who cares? Or it's not harmful because we all know it's fake. It's like, first of all, many of us are getting bamboozled every day by AI. So like the assumption that we all know it's fake is not true, but it's still harmful. And that's what was really, really important for us to drive home in the creation of this resource, is getting young people, people of all genders and of all ages, frankly, to understand that the very thought that you would go through the time and the energy that it would take to create a deep fake nude of me because I broke up with you is terrifying for me. What does that say about your malicious intent? What does it say about how you view me and how you handled or did not handle rejection? Like all of these pieces we're able to pull out by focusing on the bystander piece and really focusing on what do you do if this is your friend? And that's what we sort of break it down. So all of our resources really focus on the tangibles, not just here are some stats to bum out some young people and then hope that's going to change something. Like there's never been any evidence that just giving people stats gives them tools. It doesn't, right? But understanding that this is a moment where there are pragmatic things that you can do. So we really break it down to have a conversation with your friend. Ask your friend, why the heck are you doing this? Why do you think this is a good idea? Like, what is going on in your mind that you think this is the right approach to take? So really kind of challenging that and really framing it as like, I can't be friends with someone who treats people that way. Like it makes me view you differently when you engage in this behavior. Giving folks some runway to do better. I think that's an important conversation, especially for young people, right? This idea that what you've done is irredeemable. That's not the energy that we want to be giving to anybody, especially young people, right? So we want to give them some little bit of runway to correct their mistake, but really challenge them. Understanding that young people are not necessarily afraid of the police. They're not necessarily afraid of getting in trouble per se, but they are absolutely concerned about being ostracized by their friends, about being called out by their friends, right? Peer acceptance is the primary driver for a lot of us, not just young people, and using that to our advantage. So really challenging the person who is engaging in this behavior. Also, being realistic about chances are you know the person in the photo. That's not just a reality for those of us who come from small towns. Like your school community, your sport community is very small, right? And so chances are you know the woman or girl in question. And so we also encourage our young people to have a conversation with her. The sooner she knows this is going on, the faster she can try to sort of quell what's going on and put a stop to it. But oftentimes, because of all the things that Kaitlynn was talking about, right, in terms of these myths that if I created child pornography because I sent a photo of myself, and therefore if I report that it's going viral, I'm going to go to jail, even though I'm technically the victim. Like there's so much and I would say disinformation around this stuff that a lot of young people who are being targeted are not saying something, when what we know is the sooner you say something, the faster you can try to sort of quell the spread of what's going on. So call out your friend who's engaging in the behavior. If you know the woman or girl in question, have a conversation with her so that she knows this is going on. And then that third piece is talking to a trusted adult. So again, echoing the research that DIY is doing, young people are looking for someone to support them, and it should be their schools, and it should be the educators and the coaches and the faith leaders and the adults in their lives, but that's not happening to the degree that it should. And so being able to identify who is a trusted adult, maybe it's an older sibling, maybe it's like your cool aunt, maybe it's your basketball coach because they're, really chill and they give you space to make mistakes and talk about things. Like finding that trusted adult in your life to be like, we need to stop this from spreading and going on, and we need to have a conversation with them about why they think this is such a good idea in the first place. So I would say that, I can tell you, as someone who's been doing this work for quite some time, there's very few resources talking about deepfakes and nudes and young people. So the fact that this resource even exists is a real exciting thing for those of us who work in the sector, to speak to what some folks are saying around, things are pretty discouraging in many ways. Yeah, they are. They really are. And I'm not going to downplay that. Like, it is a bleak time to be doing this work in many ways, but I will tell you that as someone who started her career in the early 2000s, the baseline level of knowledge that young people bring to these conversations in terms of understanding consent, in terms of understanding harm, in terms of understanding their role as a bystander is like light years ahead of where it was prior to Me Too. It really, truly was. These are like a generation of young people who have existed in this world where, yes, you are seeing, you know, Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard sort of infiltrating their daily lives, but you're also hearing from survivors in a way that I certainly wasn't when I was younger, because social media didn't exist and those stories weren't being picked up. So I think rather than getting sort of overwhelmed by the breadth of the problem, what I find really helps is just kind of finding your bite-sized pieces. And that could include, okay, it is currently not illegal to make a deepfake nude of someone. That sucks. But in our current context, what can I do? Well, I can have a conversation with the people in my life about why this is a terrible idea, why it's harmful, et cetera, et cetera. I can push that media literacy. We can start educating people to identify things like AI and deepfakes and things like that. Like really sort of thinking tangibly keeps us in the game as educators, and as advocates and as activists. But I can tell you it keeps young people fired up in the conversation. We know that to be true. Like every time I go into a school, which we're actually doing, Andrea and I tomorrow, we're training the entire school board of Limestone District School Board in Kingston. What keeps young people, even in a virtual setting, fired up about it is that we're meeting them where they're at, right? So we're talking about harm reduction. We're not immediately going to, criminalizing the behavior or just like, don't do this, don't do this. And instead, we're saying, what do we want instead? We don't want rape culture. What do we want? A culture built on consent. And that means I don't take photos of people and post them online without asking them first. I don't make a photo of someone that's fake, right? Like these are all ways in which we can really break it down into these tangibles. And that keeps young people engaged. I can promise you, as someone who has had these conversations literally hundreds of times with young people across Canada, meet them where they're at, have the courage to have that harm reduction approach, and then give them some tangibles. Like the more tangible you make the conversation, the more likely it is to stick. And that's pedagogically studied across the board, right? And so we are very excited to have this new resource. I want to reiterate that it is a graphic. It is a YouTube video that anyone can access on Ophea's YouTube page. There's a curriculum document, and there's multiple other scenarios as well. And yes, they are bilingue. So if you are teaching in the French school or in immersion, and you want to use those resources, all of them are available in English and in French. So I will leave it there.
Yeah,
so
all
that we create
good.
space for questions. Yeah, unless I missed anything.
No, all good. I love your bite-sized strategies for the participants in the room. And again, these concrete ways that we can approach these conversations for educators are all there for you. Thanks so much for spotlighting that this is our collective responsibility, whether you're a community support leader or an educator in the room. This resource is very valuable. I especially really like the guiding questions in the resource. It really helps give the educator the confidence and the competence to be able to lead these conversations with the students in a meaningful way. We can get started on the questions if you want. The first question that I see right now is, as people who've been doing this for years, maybe we were feeling cautious, progress a while back. How are you managing the discouraging sexual violence landscape these days? Katie, can I throw this to you? Maybe you want to address this, and Julie, feel free to chime in.
Yeah. Well, it was actually really nice to hear you speak, Julie, because I agree with a lot of what you said about, giving them tangibles. I think that that's incredibly important. So yes, it can be depressing, but again, I think looking for the hope. So looking for what are the good things, what are the forms of resistance, what are the great organizations that are popping up doing this important work. Ophea, the fact that you have these kind of resources that we're giving young people opportunity to think through and to role play. And I think I often, Julie, I also liked what you said about we don't want to just criminalize young people. We want to give them runway because we all make mistakes. So giving people a chance to kind of think about these sorts of things. Because I think sometimes with young people, something happens and they just don't really think it through. So having opportunities for them to talk about what would you do if this happened? What would you do if you saw this? What would you do if someone told you that they were doing something? And I think that those are incredibly important opportunities to talk to people about what their rights and their responsibilities are. So, what are your rights to bodily autonomy and privacy And what role can we all play in making sure that those rights are upheld, not just for ourselves, but for each other? So again, Julie, to your point about being like a bystander and upstander, it's not just about seeing things. It's about what can we do to actually intervene. So yeah, it can be a bummer doing this kind of work. But again, I do think that there's, working with young people always gives me hope, and seeing lots of organizations and what they're doing also gives me hope.
I would just add that what keeps me in the game, what keeps me in the fight, and I know this is going to sound ironic based on the context of what we're talking about, but touching some grass and like having a real life conversation with someone and not just taking what I see on social media as what the world looks like in its entirety. I'm not someone who thinks what happens online is not real. I am someone who's experienced um, gender-based violence, tech facilitated gender-based violence. I've been impersonated. I have been I've been stalked. I've had so it's very real what happens online. But I think the discussion can be the amplifying of a minority of voices, and the loudest voices are not necessarily the most accurate ones. So getting having one-on-one conversations with people, getting into the classrooms, even if I'm zooming in, right? But like having actual conversations with people and not just an avatar on the internet does give me hope, because even when someone like adamantly disagrees with me, I still am able to kind of nudge them a little bit or get them to think about something, because it's less combative in an in-person setting, where I think online it's very much this sort of dunking on people for points. And I think that can then make it feels bleak, like very bleak for those of us who care about this, to be like, why is, I don't believe survivors trending online. Everyone thinks this. Oh my God, what a nightmare. And then you actually have conversations with people on a one-on-one basis or in a classroom, and you're like, okay, no, that's not everyone who thinks that. And I think that leads well to the next question that you were asking, Andrea, about the online piece, right? Like the radicalization.
Yeah, I'll do that question first, and then I want to also jump into the question that just came in the chat right now. Thanks so much, Katie and Julie, for addressing that question that came into the chat right now. When people were registering for this webinar, there were a lot of questions that fell under the same theme, specifically on content creators and influential figures, and how teachers can address the prevalence of this content that these creators are putting in online, especially for individuals who identify as boys with misogynistic messages. So there was a specific question that I wanted to share with yourselves, either Julie or Katie, you can chime in. How can we reach boys and young men who are already following influential figures like Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate?
Take a first stab at this one. I think it's such a great question and an important one. And I have done some work trying to kind of do some of these interventions. And I think there's a few things that need to happen. One is you have to really kind of ask ourselves, what is it about Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate that are appealing to boys? And I think, it's easy for us to kind of dismiss that, oh, they're just like crackpots and lunatics and nut jobs. But there are things that they are saying that are appealing to boys and young men, to their vulnerabilities, to kind of the challenges that they're facing in their everyday lives. So recognizing that, I think that some young boys and men are really kind of feeling vulnerable, and that there's some kind of messaging that these people are offering. And again, having studied a lot of their messaging, not everything that they say is crap. Like some of what they say is actually good advice. Get up in the morning, take care of yourself, make your bed, brush your teeth, have a shower. Like some of those things are actually like good pieces of advice. So not approaching these boys as being stupid, I think is quite important. But then I think, and I can actually see it in this chat that came in, giving young people a space and an opportunity to talk through, what is it about these influencers that is appealing to you? What are the things that you're concerned about? And one of the things that I found in doing this kind of work is it often comes better when the challenge comes from peers. So when it comes from adults, it maybe doesn't land as well as when, and again, challenges can sometimes come in just the form of questioning, gentle probing, like, hey, that's an interesting idea. Like, what is it about that? Or like, why do you think that, all women only want high value men? Like, let's kind of talk about this. So giving people a space to like critically engage with and maybe even challenge some of the ideas that some of these manfluencers are putting forward, I think is incredibly important. I think though that those kinds of conversations take time. I think that they're often best done in smaller settings. You know, you can't have like a whole school assembly where I think you're talking about these issues. But I think giving young people a chance to explore, probe each other, I think is incredibly important here.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Julie, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I was just about to plug one of our partner organizations, White Ribbon, and then I see someone in the chat has already put it there, so I'm going to put it back. So White Ribbon collaborates with Ophea on resources specific to engaging men and boys. And White Ribbon just launched this big campaign called My Friend Max Hate. And it is exactly what we're talking about. So it sort of looks at the trajectory of how young men get radicalized online. Because to Kaitlyn's point, right, like there is something, like there is a change happening in our culture around gender roles, and instead of looking at that as a positive thing or with curiosity or like isn't that interesting that we're redefining what it means to be a woman, redefining what it means to be a man, there are people who are swooping in and being like, oh, are you feeling insecure? It's because of women or immigrants or whatever, like and so it's a well-oiled machine that can feel very overwhelming. And so again, I think like so many of these issues, it can feel like, where do I even begin? My kid's not going to listen to me if they're listening to Joe Rogan. Like I'm just their parents. They're going to think whatever. But there are resources that exist out there to help you facilitate those conversations. And they are absolutely a matter of having individual conversations. All of the research in the world shows that people's ideas change and their minds change when they are given grace to change their mind, when they are treated as intelligent and that they came to their position in a way that is rational, whether it is or not, and that it's basically just chipping away slowly and really driving home that you're told by these influencers that like this behavior is attractive to women, but I'm telling you it's not. And I actually think it's helpful to talk to men and ask them why they weren't radicalized. And every time I have that conversation with a young man or an older man, and I ask them, like, what's the difference between you and these men that are being radicalized? And almost all of them were like, people told me it was not endearing to women. It was not making me cool. And women were turned off by it. And that was the key to me being like, well, if the whole point is me trying to get laid, it's not going to happen if I'm being awful to women, right? Like, it's that fundamental to this conversation. So, yeah, there's lots of great stuff out there. You're not alone for sure.
And
Yeah.
I'll chime in because I really think that you do a great job connecting it to, hey, here are some tangible resources for us to connect educators with. I see some links and also references to resources in the chat right now. But again, like as educators, this is connected to our health and physical education curriculum. When we talk about what constitutes a healthy relationship, concepts of consent, we can easily use those expectations to anchor these conversations, to connect it to what's happening in real life online with these students in front of us. Kaitlynn, Julie, do you have anything else to add? I do see a question in our Q&A chat. Are the people making fakes of teen girls other teens, girls bullying girls, or boys doing it? Or is it adult men outside the peer group? Teen girls I work with get a lot of messages from adult men, but I don't know about the fakes.
That's a really great question. I think the honest answer to that is we don't have enough research on that. So Julie, you mentioned that that study. Actually, it wasn't Julie. It was Andrea. I think it was in your slides about the deep fakes. And so organizations like Cyberscan are starting to do this research. I can tell you anecdotally, it's one of the organizations that's actually been tracking. And so it's a helpline where kids can call when they need help. And so one of the things that they found is that it's a combination, but within school, so probably, you know, those of you who are teachers, it's probably a lot of it is peers. So peers are definitely making these kinds of videos and images. Not to say that older men aren't doing it as well, but there is often like a relational aspect here. So unless it's a celebrity, it's often someone that you know. So people are making deep fakes of people that they know, whether it's someone that they are friends with, someone that they have a crush on. but people within their communities. That seems to be what I'm hearing. So, for example, cases that I've heard from the police, it is, students making these images of other students within the school.
So we all know that deepfakes are a form of gender-based violence, and it impacts individuals very differently based on the various components of their identities and also experiences. This question came in pre-registration. What is the policy or legal landscape and response to deepfakes?
Julie, you touched upon it. Currently, especially so there has been a case that went to the Supreme Court of Canada where it was an adult who'd made a deepfake nude of a child. And that seems to be considered form of child pornography. But if, say, we have two teenagers who are creating deepfake nudes of other teenagers, or an adult creating deepfake nudes of other adults, that is currently not illegal. And I did see some comments about Bill C-63, Canada's Online Harms Bill, which is stalled because Parliament has been prorogued. Bill C-63 did, in its earlier versions, have some explicit statement against deepfake nude images. But again, we don't know what's going to happen. That bill is going to die, and I think it'll really depend on the next Parliament and whether or not the next kind of leader decides to table a similar bill. That's criminal code. If we think about civil in terms of like, can you sue someone for damages? There are some provinces like British Columbia, for example, they do have civil laws on creating these images, and they are in those pieces of legislation, creating deep fake, or sometimes they're called synthetic images, is explicitly mentioned. So if you're in BC, you can sue somebody for creating a deep fake nude image. But in other provinces, like Ontario doesn't actually have a law on this, but there's like legal precedent. So I think the short answer is it kind of depends where you are. And I think we are going to need to wait and see how some courts rule on if it's something that you can sue for, because there's something about the technicality of deep fake images aren't real or authentic, and so it kind of falls into this like legal gray area. Julie, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I think it just drives home the point we've been making about how you got to make a moral argument. Like you can't sit on your laurels of like, well, it's legal, so you shouldn't be drinking, you shouldn't be doing drugs, and you shouldn't be doing this. It's like, it's not illegal, so you have to make the moral argument because you can't otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah. And talking about rights, I think is really important. So what are your rights, and how does creating a deepfake image violate those rights? Again, right to privacy, bodily autonomy, integrity, the right to control our sexual images, I think is something that we should be talking about more often, but don't. So these are things that I think are incredibly important for us all to know, but especially, especially young people who are often kind of engaging in these sexual, intimate image sharing, is a part of romantic and sexual relationships nowadays. And again, it's things that young people or people of all ages are really engaging with. So it's really important for everybody to know what their rights and their responsibilities are.
Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you, Kaitlynn. Thank you so much, Katie and Julie, for taking the time to have this conversation with us and sharing your knowledge and expertise with the people in the room right now. I really think that as members of a school community, it's all of our responsibilities to ensure that staff, students, community partners, as you shared, Julie, require the skills necessary to build healthy relationships, but also establishing positive patterns of communication and developing skills to support cooperative relationships based on respect, and making sure that we set that as a platform when discussing topics such as this. And as I shared, the health and physical education curriculum does support the learning in self-advocacy skills, conflict resolution, decision-making skills, and also the ability to use assertiveness, resistance, and refusal techniques. So everything that can be curriculum connected is there. On your slide right now, you see the landing page of Ophea's gender-based violence prevention education resources. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us at this busy late afternoon into the day today. On your slide right now, you see a QR code along with the webinar evaluation survey link. That's also going to be thrown in the chat. Please take the time to complete this webinar survey. We really ask that you take the time to provide your feedback, because we're always trying to do better in terms of how we share our content and resources with our school communities and the participants who use our resources and supports. Julie, Kaitlynn, any last words as people start exiting?
Just thank you for coming.
Awesome. Thanks so much.